Boa noite a todo mundo e obrigado por nos acompanhar aqui na mesa 10. Estamos chegando na metade, no ponto meio da Flip 2016, para um encontro que eu tenho enorme emoção de estar aqui com o nosso convidado, Karl Ove Knausgård. Karl Ove já tinha publicado 2 romances muito bem recebidos pela crítica, quando no ano 2009 publicou o primeiro volume do que se convertiria numa autobiografia em 6 partes, Minha Luta. A obra finalizada chegou a ter um total de 3.600 páginas. Ao pouco tempo de ter publicado a última parte da série, no ano 2012, ele já tinha vendido 500.000 de cópias. Na Noruega, que é um país de 5 milhões de habitantes. Então, isso quer dizer que 1 de cada 10 pessoas tinha comprado pelo menos um dos livros do Karl Ove. Tentando fazer uma comparação, se fosse o caso do Brasil, 200 e tantos milhões de habitantes, então a Companhia das Letras teria vendido 20 milhões de cópias, né? Que seria bom para o negócio. Karl Ove virou uma sensação a tal ponto de ter empresas que organizavam para os empregados os dias sem Knausgård. Knausgård Free Days. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do.
A reação da crítica não foi menos espetacular. Tem pessoas como Zadie Smith, a romancista britânica, falando que esperava a seguinte entrega, o seguinte livro do Knausgård, como se fosse crack. Já, segundo o romancista americano Jeffrey Eugenides, Karl Ove tinha ultrapassado a barreira do som do romance autobiográfico. Mais de um crítico já o comparou com Proust. A obra teve outras repercussões e o custo pessoal de ter exposto as verdades familiares foi muito alto. A Companhia das Letras está lançando agora o 4º volume da Minha Luta, chama-se Uma Temporada no Escuro, na tradução do Guilherme da Silva Braga. É um grande prazer ter o Karl Ove conosco. So, welcome, Karl Ove.
Thank you. Thank you.
Karl Ove, before I ask you to read, I was explaining in my introduction right now that you're launching here in Brazil the 4th volume of a 6-book series. And if you could perhaps give us a bit of context and tell us where in this series volume 4 sits, and then we can hear a little bit about it.
Yeah. I wrote these books very fast, and I haven't read them since I wrote them. So there's a lot in these books that I actually don't remember. But I know, the major thing, and this is a book about adolescence. It's a book about being 16, 17, 18. And it's a divided book. Half of the book is up north, where I went when I was 18 and worked as a teacher in a very small fishing village, completely isolated, which is a perfect material for a novel. And the other part is back in my hometown in Kristiansand, in Norway, southern Norway. That's the book, basically.
So why don't we hear a little fragment from the book?
Yeah, I'll read. I would have given absolutely anything to sleep with a girl. Any girl, actually. Whether it happened with someone I loved, like Hanne, or with a prostitute, made no difference. If it happened as part of a satanic initiation ceremony with goat's blood and hoods, I would have said, yes, I'm up for that. But it wasn't something you were given, it was something you took. Exactly how, I didn't know. And then it became a vicious circle. For not knowing made me unsure of myself, And if there was one thing that disqualified you, one thing they didn't want, it was a lack of self-assurance. That much I had understood. You had to be confident, determined, convincing. But how to get to that position? How in God's name could you do that? How did you go from standing in front of a girl in full daylight with all her clothes on to sleeping with her in the darkness a few hours later? There was a chasm between these two states. When I saw a girl standing in front of me in full daylight, there was a bottomless chasm between us. If I stepped off the edge, I would fall. What else? Because she wouldn't come halfway. She could see I was frightened. She would withdraw, retreat into herself, or turn to someone else. But actually, I thought, the distance between the two states was very short. It was just a question of lifting her t-shirt over her head, unfastening her bra, unbuttoning her trousers, pulling them off, and then she was naked. It would take 20 seconds, maybe 30. There was nothing more deceptive in existence. Walking around, knowing that I was approximately 30 seconds away from all I ever wanted, separated only by a chasm, was driving me insane. Quite often I caught myself wishing we were still in the Stone Age. Then all I needed to do was to go out with a club, hit the nearest woman on the head, and drag her home to do whatever I wanted. But it was no good. There were no shortcuts. The 30 seconds were an illusion, as almost everything concerning women was an illusion. Oh, what a mockery that they were accessible to the eye, but in no other way. That everywhere you turned, there were women and girls. That everywhere you turned, there were breasts under blouses, thighs and hips under trousers, beautiful smiling faces, hair blowing in the wind. Pendulous breasts, firm breasts, round breasts, bouncing breasts, white breasts, tan breasts, a naked wrist, a naked elbow, a naked cheek, a naked eye looking around, a naked thigh in shorts or a short summer dress, a naked palm, a naked nose, a naked neck. I saw all this around me constantly. There were girls everywhere. The supply was infinite, a well. No, I was drifting in an ocean of women. I saw several hundred of them every day, all with their own individual ways of moving, standing, turning, walking, holding and twisting their heads, blinking, looking. Take, for example, a feature such as their eyes, which express their utter uniqueness. Everything that lived and breathed was here in this one person, was revealed, regardless of whether the gaze was meant for me or not. Oh, those sparkling eyes. Oh, those dark eyes. Oh, that glimpse of happiness. The alluring darkness. Or, for that matter, the unintelligent, the stupid eyes. For in them, too, there was an appeal. And no small appeal either. The stupid, vacant eyes, the open mouth in that perfect, beautiful body. And this was never far from my mind. And all of them were 30 seconds away from the only thing I wanted. But on the other end, on the other side of a chasm. I cursed this chasm. I cursed myself. But no matter how frustrating this was, no matter how depressing this became, women shone with undiminished radiance. Then a chance presented itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Karl Ove. And this question of whether you will succeed in your quest with women runs through the book. It's a coming-of-age story.
Yeah.
If one reads this volume alone, it's about you on the cusp of manhood, desperately trying to get laid and, you know, drinking and doing drugs and all these things. But it's also about your first steps towards becoming a writer.
Yeah.
And there is one particular line I picked out which says, all the books I liked were basically about the same topic: young men who hated middle-class values and sought freedom. They traveled, they got drunk, they read, and they dreamed about their life's great passion or about writing the great novel. Tell us a little bit about what you were looking for in those readings.
I think I came from a very restricted home. That's one thing. I mean, I never talked to my father, for instance, about anything. And I also came from a kind of a restricted culture. And I lived in a city where Christianity was kind of common. So in my class, the cool kids were the Christian kids, you know, going to church and stuff like that. So I felt so restricted myself. But in literature or in film, there was kind of a feeling of, you know, the world opens up, there is more there, and it is available, you can go there, you know, but you have to find a way into that. So it's a matter of freedom, you know. And this is a very romantic notion. I mean, the world isn't like that, and those writers were maybe not so very good, you know, I can see that now, but they have this, you know, desire for life. You know, if you read Kerouac, I mean, that's a desire for life and to be alive. And that should be easy. It's the same thing with the passage I read now. It should be easy, you know, it's love, it's lust, it's good stuff. And it's so hard to get there, at least it was like that for me. So writing was a way to try to get there. And I didn't, and I have to say.
And we see you in this volume constantly seeking reassurance from people you trust and you love. You're showing people some of your work, your brother, your mother, an uncle, and we can see how stung you are by their lack of enthusiasm. And at some point your mother says, are you really going to publish? You know, it's nice, it's okay, but are you really going to publish this?
Yeah.
At which point you say, or the Karl Ove in the book says, I will show them. I'm going to be big. Otherwise, I might as well shoot myself. Is that what was driving you then? And do you still recognize that
It was,
feeling?
yeah. In this book, I try to, you know, tell it as it is. And this isn't a very noble motive for writing. And it isn't a very noble thing to say, you know, I want to crush them, I want to, you know, I want to be big. But it was part of my ambition then, when I was young. And I tried to write, and I wrote kind of freely, not very good, because I was so immature and maybe even stupid. A young man's stupidity is very stupid, indeed. But then, 10 years after, I kind of, something, just after 10 years of trying to write something, you know, came. And it was a freedom in there, and I could write freely, you know, which was incredibly, felt like an incredible gift. And the book was published, and the book was a minor success, and I have achieved everything I wanted. And I was going to publish my next book, and I tried to copy the success, do the same thing. And in that process, I realized, no, it wasn't about being recognized. It wasn't about having the book published. It wasn't about, you know, being famous or whatever. It was about writing, and that was kind of the magic trick for me. When I realized this is really how it is, you know, that writing is like reading. It is a place outside of everything where you could be completely free, and it's a very good place to be, and maybe the only place where you could experience things you can't do, you know, outside of literature. And
in fact, your first and second books were very different.
Yeah.
In style and subject matter.
Yeah, very much so. The first book is very self-biographical, but it is hidden sort of beneath a fiction. Yes. Yeah. And the thing, the driving forces in writing is to get to the things you didn't know before you were writing it, you know. So it's like, if you write something and you recognize what's on your page, it probably isn't very good, because it is a result of not writing, but like concepts and thinking. But if it comes out something that you haven't seen before, which is amazing, that's writing, and that's why you write, and that's also why you want to read. You want to read something you haven't thought of, you know. And how is that possible, you know, to write something and don't recognize it, or see, this isn't really me, this is something else? What's that? Is it a gift from, you know, heaven? No, it isn't. It is. Literature is there, language is there, it's outside of us, culture is there, forms are there, you know, and you just, if you throw yourself into it, it changes. It's like it changed slightly, yourself changed, and you see yourself differently, you understand differently, and then you are writing, because that perspective gives that perspective and this perspective. And that's the strange thing about writing about yourself and your own life. You think, you know, I know everything about myself, and you should think there's nothing to explore, there's nothing unknown in yourself. Yeah, it's like it's 90% unknown things in you, I think, and only 10% that's the idea you have of yourself.
So would you say self-knowledge is one of the things that impels you now, sort of trying to find out more about yourself?
No, the end of this book wasn't me. It was writing a novel. That was the aim. That was what I wanted. That's why I could be so, you know, ruthless with myself and disclose secrets I wouldn't tell anyone, because the book is the important thing. I'm not important. The book is important.
You use the word novel.
Yeah.
And this has been an issue that critics have been sort of poring over. Is this a memoir? Is this autobiography? In Norway, it was published with the subtitle, A Novel.
Yeah.
I think when it crossed over to the US, they were having difficulties. How do we label this?
Yeah.
Does that bother you at all? Or
No. I don't like labeling at all. But for me, it's a novel. Just because of those reasons I was talking about. It's not about presenting the stories of my life. That would be boring, and my life is really boring. A kind of a completely normal life, you know. It is about exploring that and using yourself as kind of a raw material and try to find something, you know, and search for something. And the main search in this book, I think, is, you know, identity. That's very important. And yeah, then again, identity is the story you present for yourself. If you present yourself to someone else, it's, you know, I went to school there, I'm from there, this is, you know, this is what's happened. It's a very short story. And it's all contained in your name. That's you, you know. And a biography would probably present it like that in a chronology, you know. But in a novel, you could just crush that, you know. You can dive into it, you can write 1,000 pages about 2 minutes of that life. And you see how can an identity fit into that. How, you know, that's very interesting, I think. Because our lives are so rich, our thoughts are so rich, our culture is so rich. And then we have this reduction, which I think is a practical way of living. We have to have it of practical reasons, you know. But there is so much more which you can explore in a novel. If you explore it in real life, you are, you know, schizophrenic or bipolar, or there is a diagnosis to it. Because this is also dangerous stuff, identity, losing your identity. If you go into mental states where there is no self that keeps it together, you're only bits and pieces. It's terrible to watch, and I have watched that in my life. So, yeah, these are the questions that interest me, and that's why I'm telling this is a novel.
Yes. One of the themes, it seems to me, not only in this book, but perhaps throughout the series, and in this volume in particular, you use the word shame repeatedly.
Yeah.
You express shame about the things people don't usually share. The fact that you were a virgin when everyone around you was having sex, the fact that you had never masturbated and you so didn't know how to do this. So all these things which are in the book, that you had difficulty with the girls. So is this novel a way to get rid of that shame?
Yeah, you should think it was, but it isn't, because when you write, you are by yourself, you know. There's no one in the room, it's only you. If you have problems with writing, that's maybe because you imagine someone thinking, this is no good, how dare you saying this, you know. So to be able to write is to put yourself in a situation where you're completely free. Then you almost have to lose yourself. Then you can just write, you know. And that's what I was doing in that book, reaching a kind of a state of selflessness and freedom in writing. But then, when the book is published, then there is a social situation, and the shame comes back. It was the situation of writing that was shameless somehow. But then it comes back, and it comes back. And when you mention the most embarrassing thing, I never said it to anyone in my life, that I didn't masturbate before I was like 19, which is, it is a very strange thing, and I never said it to anyone, and then I wrote it, you know, and then I have a friend, I read it, and I thought, can I read this to him? I was so extremely embarrassed, and he just, you know, laughed for 10 minutes, and I said, okay, it won't get any worse than this, and I can publish it, but I still get embarrassed when you mention it, you know, because everybody can, you know, what was he thinking, you know?
I don't know what the line was in Norwegian. I don't know what it's in Portuguese, but the English translation is absolutely priceless. It's wanking was unthinkable.
Yeah. What does that say about me? You know?
We were talking earlier on, and you said that it's easier to talk about these things on stage. In fact, you're talking about your book.
Yeah.
Than it would be if you and I were sitting down having a beer.
Yeah.
Why is that?
That's well, I think that this situation is very much like writing. The only thing it isn't creative in the same way, but it is. You have to be completely free and be able to say even the stupidest things and allow yourself to do that, to be able to say something, you know, substantial somehow. But I don't know, shame has been a topic in my novels since the very beginning. And the first book, my editor put on the back of the back of the novel, he put a monument of male shame. And when I saw that, I didn't understand it. Is this a book about shame? Because I'm bathing in shame, you know. So I didn't know that I was writing about it. So I've been very interested in what it is, you know. And if you're interested in identity, then you have to be interested in shame, because it's the society, the others inside of yourself, you know, which is a good thing. It keeps you in place, and it keeps, you know, as a social being. It's very necessary to be shameful somehow. But then cultures can develop too much shame, and then you are kind of fucked, because then you can't do anything. You're paralyzed by it. And writing this book is the worst thing I could do, because the worst thing I could do was to reveal everything and say, look, you know, because it's so shameful. But that was kind of a liberating act, because what I learned is, okay, no, it isn't dangerous. It isn't dangerous. Even writing about other people was full of rage against me, but nobody died, nobody committed suicide, you know, it's 5 years since, and kind of life goes on. It wasn't that dangerous. But in a country like Norway, this was a scandal. Nobody had done this before, you know, writing about everything with full names in the open.
It's not a very confessional culture. I mean, the French have sort of ego fiction or sort of self-fiction. Americans and Brits have, you know, sort of the misery memoir.
Yeah.
But this is not something that in Scandinavia is very common.
There are, in fact, to be specific, in Sweden has kind of a tradition because of August Strindberg, the great Swedish writer. So there's a line, but in Norway hasn't been anything like it.
So it was the fact that you were talking about yourself as much as exposing other people.
Yeah, Yeah, it was unmoral, and it was a moralistic or moral discussion about it.
Yeah.
And it is somehow immoral to write about other people. But if you write about your own life, you can't only write about yourself, because life is the relationship to the others, you know. And that's it's a very hard place to be. Because can I say to someone, my book is more important than your life? I can't really do that, you know. But at the same time, I did.
So what does it take from you to expose yourself like that? Is it courage? Is it recklessness? What?
There's some recklessness and some self-destructiveness in it, I think. Yeah. But I started to write this book because I was so incredibly frustrated and angry and all kind of things. So it felt like I had nothing to lose. It was like I could have left my family. I could have, done all those kind of things. But instead, I wrote this novel, and I thought I have nothing to lose. I can write about everything. I don't care. So I was careless. And my wife, I wrote about everything about us, which is a terrible thing to do.
What was her reaction to that?
She is a writer herself. And I told her I'm writing about us. And she said, fine, just don't make me a bore, she said. Because she knows if you restrict someone, it looks, it became boring. And then I gave her the manuscript, and she was on a train ride. And she called me after 20 minutes, and she said, this is terrible, but I can live with it. And then she called back an hour later, and she said, goodbye, romance. And then the third time she called, and she was just crying. She was just crying. I was just coming home, and she said, you publish your book. It's not a book, it's the relationship, We have to talk it through. Yeah. And we did for like two days. And that is because if you are in a relationship with someone, I think there are so many things you don't say. You know of them, but you don't say them. If you say them, they become real somehow. So to be in a marriage or in a relationship is based upon lying or hiding, and that's a pact you have, And if that pact is broken, it is almost impossible to repair. And so innocent things, like in the book it says that when I see a beautiful woman on the street, I look at her, even when I have a pram in my hands and a baby there. This is such a stupid thing. Why do you do that? But you just do that, And that was not fun for her to read. And there was a lot of stuff like that, and then more serious stuff, It wasn't about the arguments we had, and it wasn't about that other people should read it, but it was about my inner life in regards to her.
But do you think that's one of the things that has sort of touched so many people who have read this? Even though you're talking very specifically about yourself, but you are saying things, and you use this word often, things that are unthinkable. That you wished your father to be dead, that being a father can be incredibly tedious, describing your wife's bipolarity, this kind of thing. So people reading about your very specific personal experience might share the same sense of sort of release and freedom to, yes, actually, I recognize this.
Yeah, that's an incredible thing, because when I was writing this book, I thought this is too private, this is too much me, that even my friends wouldn't be interested. And it's also very boring, because it deals with a lot of boring stuff, which is my boring life. And I thought, the publishers printed a low first print because it was looked upon as a kind of a literary experiment of some kind. And then it kind of just boom, and everybody started to read it in Norway. And the reaction I got was completely different from the other books. The other books was like, yeah, that was a nice scene, or that was nice and good and stuff. But with this book, people come over to me and want to talk about their own life. And it's exactly what you're saying. It's about the father, or the bipolarity, or the relationship, or being too aggressive as a father, all those things. And it's an amazing thing because it is a book, it is literature, but people are talking about life, you know. That's what you want as a writer, to write about life and to reach that level. And sometimes people are crying when they're speaking, because some wounds have been opened. And it's not because of the book is good. It has nothing to do with quality, but it has to do with a sense of an experience. I think that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. I'd like to take us back a little bit to the beginnings of the project, of My Struggle, and what kicked it off in the first place, which was your father's death.
Yeah.
You've said that this was the first time you'd seen a dead person.
Yeah.
And you had scores to settle with your father. So the first volume is about his death and your reaction to that.
Yeah.
I understand you had tried to write sort of a fictionalized version of that relationship, which you felt was, it rang false.
Yeah.
And so that kicked off the project.
I tried. He died in 1998. And when that happened, it was so shocking to me, because I hated my father and I wanted him dead. And I went down there to the house where he died, and it looked like a junkie nest. It looked terrible, terrible, terrible. And it was shocking, just that. But then another shock was that I was crying. I was so full of sorrow. I was like crying for a week. For him, why, you know? And I knew I had to write about this. Somehow I had to write about this. But it took me 10 years before I was able to do it. And I tried all those 10 years to do it. And the thing I wanted was the feeling I had when I wanted it to be real. And the feeling of death and the feeling of father was so strong in me that everything I wrote looked, false and fake, and I didn't believe in it somehow. And I think when I started this book, the first thing I'm writing about is 100 pages about. The first thing I did was saying, this is true, this is me, this is my children, this is the setting. And then I was going to write about my father's death. And I start to write about a scene when I'm 16 years old. I'm going to a party, it's winter, it's snowing. We're not allowed to buy bears. It's a lot about buying bears and stuff and hiding bears and And then 100 pages later, we come to the party and we are refused and we go back. That's 100 pages. What is it about? It's about life. It's about stupid life. It's about, triviality, banalities. But that was a pathway to writing about death, because what was shocking to me was the banality of death and the ordinariness it happened in. It's such an extraordinary thing, death, but everything around it is normal, So I wanted to kind of find a way to deal with that. And then I just keep on writing about death in this trivial detail matter, trying to represent the feeling I had, wanting the reader to be knowing my father a little bit, knowing me a little bit, and then it happens. And the rest 5 books is about him and me, and it's like in various different stages of life. So my father was different when I was 16 than he was when I was 40 or 12.
You've described this process as a floodgate suddenly opening and the stream of narrative coming out. But in fact, there are the instruments of a writer of fiction which you've employed. So there is this sort of stream of consciousness, but we always feel that you are in control. You remain the novelist because you're making editorial decisions. Why do you take 100 pages to describe a banal passage? Because you're trying to make a point. So it's not just sort of writing for the sake of writing. Where do you cut off a scene? All these things. So the tricks of the trade are there. So the readers shouldn't think that this is just gushing out.
No, but there was a first part of this story, and that was 10 years trying to write without succeeding, you know.
Yeah.
And that's the real writing is. I mean, I think it's Thomas Mann who defined a writer who a person for whom it's difficult to write. That's an author. And I think that's true. And almost all the work is done in the failing thing, you know, failing. If you think about music, you know, to be able to improvise, you have to, you know, constantly rehearse every day so that you know everything. Why? Because you should do it without thinking. That's where the music is. No thinking in music. And it is also no thinking in literature, I think. That's what I think. I think thinking is overrated. I think, you know, there's so much else that governs us, and especially writing. So yes, it is. I know things intuitively because I've been practicing so long. Yeah. And it is like an instrument. And it is all about improvisation and instinct somehow.
This brings me on to the question of the style of the writing, which seems to be sort of consciously empty of anything that is an attempt at, you know, stylishness or at a sort of, you know, rhetorical flourishes. You seem to have tried to keep the prose as simple as possible, so that there is no sort of barrier of style between you and the reader. Do you agree with that?
The first 15 pages before the story of the party is a kind of an essay about death. And I spent 2 months on that essay, you know. And I polished it, and I did, you know, I tried to make it as the best writing ever. I put all I had into that 15 pages. And then my editor read the book, and he said, yeah, it's good, but the first 15 pages, they're so different than the rest, we take it out. And I said, no. I need, this is the only place where people can see that I can write, you know. That's in the beginning. So that's why it's there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the rest is, I try to be as little literary as I can, and as direct as I can. And then I write as quickly as I can. Because if you write quickly, you kind of, you can't.
You don't think.
No, and you can't really be very critical because, you know, in half an hour I'm going to pick up the children and I have to write 3 pages, and you just write it.
I read about 20 pages a day you were
That
writing?
was in the end of the process. In the beginning it was 5, and then it was 10, and in the end it was 20.
Well, that's because the books were getting bigger and bigger.
Or I was just speeding up, you know, and I wanted to finish it.
Yes. Another theme that emerges is masculinity seems to be a theme, and it comes across very clearly in this volume 4, the Dancing in the Dark. So it's about becoming a man, which involves, you know, sort of the sex, but also sort of picking fights and then feeling, you know, sort of humiliated. There's the elements of becoming a father, and how this affects your masculinity. Is that something that, do you feel that's an important part of the project? Yeah,
very much so. Yeah. It is about identity, you know. And what roles does, it protects you, you know. So if you have masculinity or being a man, it's a role that protects you, make it simple for you, you know. And so that's a very important thing in the book. And when I was a child in Norway in the 70s, it was kind of the codex for behavior was like in the age of the Vikings, you know. You shouldn't cry, you should be brave, you should, you know, and that didn't fit with me at all. I mean, I liked flowers, I liked to pick flowers, I liked to wear red, I liked to talk with the girls. I was not supposed to talk at all as a boy, you know. And then when I was 13, I was called feminine, which was the worst thing you could say to a boy, you know. And everybody called me that, and it was kind of completely crushed myself and my identity and my self-worth, you know. So then I was kind of rehearsing in front of the mirror, trying to have masculine, you know, movements, and, you know, it's true, I did. And then I kind of finally find a way, a role that helped me. And then I thought I should write about all of this, and then I had children, There's another role, is a father role. My father was useless as a father, I think. Terrible father, but he was the only role model I have. And when I had children, 1 year, 1.5 years, I could be, so angry for nothing. I consider myself as a good person. Where on earth did that come from, Is it him in me? And there is also this expectations you have. There's, you shouldn't be like a mother. In Scandinavia, everything changed last generation. Every father I know is like a mother, Mm-hmm. They are a year home with the children when they are babies. All men are. And that change is very interesting, and it kind of keeps a pressure on masculinity. Those things I was interested in. And being kind of on the other side, liking flowers and reading and liking to dress nicely, I could move in and out of that role and explore it somehow. It just was acute. I tried to go to the places where it really burnt. And for me, that was masculinity. It burns there. My father, it burns.
Lots of questions coming in, as you can see. But I think before we move on to this, it's almost impossible to talk about the work without talking about the reaction to the work.
Yeah.
And so, in particular, the first and second volume, which meant that you were sort of burning bridges with family and friends. The sort of Norwegian society's reaction was sort of vitriolic in part. And somehow this comes back to haunt you when you're sitting down to write the final volumes. So at that point you were already having to deal with the very loud noise created by publication of the first 2 volumes.
Yeah, that was part of the plan, because this is a book about life, literature. And I knew if I start to publish a book in autumn, and then I write 3 novels that year and I publish them, it will come back to me. The reaction to the people I'm writing about will come back to me. And I wanted to put in the last volume back into literature again. Yeah. One of my favorite books are Don Quixote, Cervantes. And it's such a brilliant thing. The second book, they read, the first book in the book. Yeah. That's a very baroque thing, but I thought I could do that now. So book 6 is about the consequences of the 5 other books. Yes. So it starts like 2 days before publishing, and it goes on with all the consequences. And it's the moral consequences. It's my uncle. He was so full of rage, and he wanted to sue me and stop the book. But it was like, he was so full of rage. And he's my father's brother, And it's like, it's him again. And it was terrible, terrible, terrible. But it was terrible for a reason. I did something to him I shouldn't have done, That's one consequence. Media, another consequence. My wife, another consequence. The pressure on us was so high for a year. For that year, media, attention, all kind of things. So she had a breakdown. Was in hospital. I had to visit her with the children. It was incredibly sad and incredibly terrible. And then I was writing about it again, Why? Yeah, because I knew it's going to be good. That's how terrible it is. And then when I was writing that, that's the end of the book, I was writing and crying, and I sent it to my editor, and he said, but there's nothing on the page. It's all in you. You have to write it again. And I did it again, and I was crying, and the same thing happened. And the third time, I kind of pushed it a little bit further, but I couldn't describe how it was. I couldn't go that far. So that was why it was such a relief to end the book, which ends with the sentence, I'm so happy that I'm no longer an author. Because that felt like, I'm free. I'm out of this literature. I want to live and be happy.
But of course that's not true.
Of course I didn't.
That's not true, because you've gone on to write more books now.
Yeah, exactly.
So you continue to be an author. Something that comes up in the last volume is related to one of the questions that's come in, and I imagine a question that comes up all the time, which is about the title of the book.
Yeah.
Min Kamp in Norwegian, with echoes of Mein Kampf, obviously, My Struggle. So tell us about the choice, because to many people that seemed almost like a provocation.
Yeah. Yeah, it was so for me too. I wanted to say, I don't care, you know, I don't care. I'm writing this because I have to. That's in the title. But it was the original title, I should not mention that here, but the original title was Argentina, you know that?
Argentina.
Yeah, that was the working title on the book. And then I was in a conversation with a friend, and we were talking about Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf, and he said, there's your title. And I knew he was right. It's a perfect title. Because if you just read the title, My Struggle, that's what the book is. It's mine, and it's a struggle, and it's an everyday life struggle, you know. And then you have the echo of Adolf Hitler's struggle. What was that, you know? That was ideology, that was, you know, Nazism, a lot of, yeah. And I had to read that book because of, I choose the title. So I read Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf, and then I know I have to write about that. And that's one of the consequences. So in book 6, it's like 300 pages about Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
But seen as if he was young, he fell in love. He didn't dare to contact the girl he loved. He couldn't. There was again an abyss. So he sent a postcard to her with no name. He loved music. You know, he wanted to be an artist. Exactly the same as the figure in my struggle books. So I'm writing about him from that perspective. And I'm writing about the 30s. And I'm just, you know, how could this happen? How could this happen to a generation, to a country, to the world? That's what I'm curious about. And it's the only place in the book that's outside of me. So this is a kind of a mirror you could see yourself in, and we could see ourselves in. And in the middle of this writing, it took me half a year to write about him, and I read so much about it. Anders Behring Breivik, Norwegian killer, was you know, doing the massacre in Norway. So. And it's a bow, so it ends there with him, because he's 10 years younger than me, but from the same culture, same background. How on earth could he do what he did, you know? That's kind of an acute question in the end of the book. So, yeah, the title might have been a bad, you know, choice in the beginning, but it ended with, yeah, real serious search into it somehow.
Somebody has sent a question saying that you you met with Henry Marsh, who's here in Parachi, and you joined him to see the brain surgery.
Yeah.
The question is, was that to have a less boring life?
Yeah. It was one of the most amazing experiences I've had. He was operating in Albania, which is a small European country, very poor, very exotic. It was a communist country until, you know, early 90s. And I knew nothing about Albania, and I knew nothing about brain surgery. And I was allowed to watch the operations, so I saw them, you know, sawing up the skull, lifting it up, you know, cutting into it, while the patient was awake. So you could talk to the patient while that was happening. And it was so fascinating, and it's so hard to believe that this is matter, physiology, physics, you know. I watched them talk about this yesterday, and they could, you know, make this much more sensible. But it was like, and I looked into the microscope, and it was like looking out in the universe. It was so beautiful, you know, it was so beautiful. It was like, yeah, it was incredible. And then, you know, my book is about, it's 3,600 pages. It's a book about a world, it's my world. It could have been 20,000 or 30,000 pages, you know, because life feels so rich, and it's my world, as you have your world. But it's all located in this little lump in the head. That's so mysterious. That's so hard to grasp. How is that possible, you know? So you could say, no, as a scientist, you don't believe in God, you know, but this is the gap between, you know, the matter and life is the gap between the living and God for me. I think it is, yeah, that's the great mystery.
Thank you. Somebody has asked, while writing My Struggle, were there things that you decided to hide, things that you found too difficult to write down?
I write very little about, you know, sex. direct. I don't describe that much. That's because the situation is too intimate to share. You know, so I don't write. It's not that it's difficult to write about sex, because I don't think it is, but it's out of respect. I didn't go there. And the other thing I didn't write about was football, which surprised my friend. He went to Brazil, in the World Cup, and I was home, and we made a book as a letters. He's here, and he knows Portuguese and speaks it, and I've translated a lot of Portuguese books, and he's a football fan. I'm a football fan. And he was almost shocked when he realized, you know, are you so interested in football? Why is that not in the book, you know? It's kind of, I didn't hide it, but it didn't fit in somehow.
Yeah, so that could have been a whole different book.
If I've followed the football path, yes, of course. Yeah.
Someone has asked, are you comfortable with being compared to Proust?
What do you think? No, it's like...
It must be nice.
It is almost like an insult, because I read in a French, now it was a Spanish paper, I think, the Norwegian Proust. But that's a contradiction in terms. That's impossible to be Proust from Norway. Proust is, you know, elegant, sophisticated, you know, extremely complicated. That's the best book that ever been written, you know. My book is the opposite. It's very raw, very direct, and the only thing that we have in common is length and the focus on one individual, and that's it.
Yes. There you have your answer. Someone has asked if there are any other writers who have influenced your approach to writing My Struggle, in particular Nicholson Baker.
I haven't read him, no.
The next one will be a quick one. Karl Ove, have you ever tried cachaça?
No.
You should. It's very good to calm the nerves. A question here about whether this is a pure exercise in memory.
Yeah.
Do you think of writing My Struggle as a pure exercise in memory, or have you complemented with your own imagination?
Yeah, well, when I started, the idea was everything is in my head. The past is in my head, all my relations in my head. I write about what's in my head. If it's wrong, if someone corrects me and says, no, it didn't happen that way, I stick to what's in my head, and I did. But to be able to dramatize something, you know, you have to have elements in it that I don't remember, which isn't based upon memory, but it is as close as I could get. I mean, a direct quote from my mother in 1976, you know, that's impossible.
Yeah, I wondered about dialogue, because there's a lot of dialogue which is
Yeah.
reported, you know, directly as dialogue, and
Yeah.
I can't believe that you would recollect all of those conversations.
No.
Perhaps you kind of you remember what was being discussed and sort of the tone
Yeah,
of the conversation,
yeah.
but the actual words being used, that is
No, that's
your own
yeah.
contribution.
Yes, exactly. And it is a, you know, it's a again like music. If you have an ear for something, there is a different tone to dialogues in the 60s and the 70s, 80s, 90s, you know. That's what I'm playing with, basically.
This is an interesting one. How do you feel coming to a place like this, where there are maybe 1,000 people who feel they know you, but where you know nobody?
Yeah. I didn't think of the consequences when I wrote the book. I didn't think of it being published. Then it was published, and I went to one event after publication, and everything was changed. I mean, people were moving around me differently. Every behaved differently around me. And I was on my plane back home, and I feel, you know, immensely depressed, because I realized, you know, I've sold it. I sold my family. I sold my soul. Sold everything I had. And then I thought, I will never go there. I will never think about that again. I would deny it. And it's working. I don't think, when I come in here, I didn't think that anybody has read what I've been writing, that anybody knew me. It works. It completely denial. And it works. And it's true. It's true.
Do you have any regrets or do you feel any guilt?
Yeah, I do feel guilt, but I try to deal with it, you know. I feel guilt for my children. They were growing up being in a book. But my argument to myself is that that's not the end of the world. That's, you know, that's not them. That's just the father trying to make something. So, but that's the hard part, to know that I've done something that will affect them. But there is nothing in the book I regret that I wanted to take out. There's nothing like that. It's the whole thing or nothing, you know.
Yeah. There's another question here related to that. What do you expect to come up against when your children become teenagers?
Yeah,
the same age as...
it has started, you know. It has started, yeah. I don't know. I really can't. I don't know. But I feel like there's been a change, a switch in time, almost since I was young, since I was a teenager, in the culture. The confessional element in culture is so much more common. You have the Facebook things where you write about private stuff. It's so much more common. And I think it isn't the end of the world. But they will be very angry, but maybe not because of that. Maybe because something completely different.
There is something that at the very bottom of the whole project, and you've said in various interviews that you always wanted to be a good person.
Yeah.
But in writing this book, you may have hurt many people without wishing to. And I'm reminded of a conversation on this very stage with Jonathan Franzen, the American novelist, where he said, you cannot be an artist who's interested in the truth and be a good person. How do you feel about that?
No, that's true. That makes it so hard to do these things, you know. That's exactly it. Because what you sacrifice is nothing, it's not yourself, it belongs to others. And if you write about someone else, it's like you're taking something from that person, you know. You're taking something to use to your own purpose. And then, but maybe people could say, but literature, you know, is very important for the society as a whole. That's true. I think it is. I think literature is, you know, one of the most important things we have. But on a personal level, that doesn't work. You know, you are hurting people, you are doing bad stuff. And that's a conflict that you are in every day as a writer. Because even though you write as a fiction, those near to you know that, you know, that it isn't. So if you have a friend who experienced something, it's very important to him, and you just take it and write it, make it to yours. That's not a good person won't do that.
Someone has asked, what, as a writer, have been your greatest, has given you the greatest satisfaction, and what has been your greatest challenge?
What writer that has given me the greatest satisfaction?
As a writer, what has given you the greatest satisfaction?
That's the state of the same thing as reading, you know. When I was a child, I read tremendously a lot of books. It was a way of getting away from everything. I could just be on my bed, read, be another place, you know, as an escapism. Writing is the same thing. You disappear for yourself, you disappear from the world. But it's not necessarily escapism, but it is, that's the best thing, to be not a person even, just to be, you know. That's amazing. And I think the only way I can achieve that is in literature. But it almost sounds like some religious thing that, you know, but it is a good thing. That's the best thing. And the other part of the question was?
Well, the greatest challenge.
To be honest, for real. And not to repeat yourself. Yeah. Which, that's very hard. Especially if what you do are successfully, you know. Yeah. That's why I admire David Bowie so very much, because he had his success formula, you know. Ziggy Stardust. It's a hit and he's a star. What does he do? It
changes.
Yeah, do something else, completely from scratch. You have to be so brave to do that, you know. And so that's a hard thing, to try to do something different.
So speaking of changing, you said the last line of the 6th volume is that you are now very happy to stop being an author. But of course you've continued to write. And your next work is a very different sort. Now, I write for newspapers, and so I know that you shouldn't believe everything you read in a newspaper. But I read in a newspaper that this work may even include some writing you've done about your arrival in Brazil. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Tell us about that.
No, it's 4 books. And the last book is half of it is a diary, a June diary. So it starts on the 1st of June, and I arrived here the 27th of June. So Rio is in the book, and Paraty is in the book, and you will be in the book.
I look forward to that.
Yeah.
Do you feel some distance now from My Struggle? It was published a few years back. You keep having to revisit when you have conversations like this.
Yeah.
But do you feel now it's at arm's length and you can begin to let it go?
Yeah, I try to let it go all the time. Sometimes, I can believe the hype, and I can think, yeah, I did something good, And then I just have to open the book. I can open this book here, I can see, oh no, it isn't, I have to improve, I have to do something better. That's the way I'm dealing with it.
Yeah. You told me when we started that 1 out of every 3 events you have like this goes horribly wrong.
Yeah.
I don't think this was one of them. I think it's been a fantastic conversation. I hope you'll agree with that. And I would like to bring this to a close by thanking you very, very deeply and warmly for your candidness.
Thank you very much for being so patient. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much.